the Jeffersonian Republic. So what we're going to look at is really simply the two-term presidency of Thomas Jefferson. We'll do it one term at a time. So we'll look at the key events and happenings of the first term, and then we'll switch gears and do the same thing with the second term. So let's get going. But first, a quote. So President Kennedy in 1962 invited 49 Nobel laureates for dinner. He famously said, quote, "I think this is the most extraordinary collection of talents, of human knowledge that has ever been gathered together at the White House, with the possible exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined alone." So once again, Thomas Jefferson, he really is known for being quite a Renaissance man, just very talented, very intelligent. And so we're going to see his presidency today. So let's kind of review first. What's something we already know about Thomas Jefferson? Well, we know him because he wrote the Declaration of Independence. We know him because he was in George Washington's cabinet. He was the Secretary of State involved with foreign affairs. We know he's starting the Democratic Republican Party. We know that he's an anti-federalist, or he was an anti-federalist. He's for the common man. He likes the French, that sort of thing. And so now he's going to become a president. And remember, as president, kind of the rival political party at the time was the Federalists, where you have Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of State under George Washington, starting the Democratic Republicans. And then you had Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of Treasury, starting the Federalist Party. So this is what Thomas Jefferson had to say about those Federalists. "I shall, by the establishment of Republican principles, sink federalism into an abyss from which there shall be no resurrection," right? So he was kind of salty with the Federalists, and we're going to see that's kind of a trend throughout his presidency. All right, so we're just going to talk very, very generally about what his ideal America would look like. So this is just kind of an understanding of what Jeffersonian Republic would be. So Thomas Jefferson, Democratic Republic, really for the common man. And his ideal America would be a country of small, independent farmers. That would also have a very, very small government as well. So the whole idea is if we had enough land and if everyone had their own farm and was independent, then really government shouldn't have a role hardly at all, right? According to his own logic here, in the Declaration of Independence, right, the government's just there to protect our rights. And so he really sees that as really one of the only roles of the federal government, of the national government. And so he's going to want a really small government that hardly interferes at all in the lives of people. And he wants people to have independence through the use of having their own land, their own farm. So this is, Thomas Jefferson saying, "This is beautiful." Thomas Jefferson would like Iowa. That's all I got to say about that. All right, so before we can start to talk about his presidency, we have to talk about his bumpy road to becoming president. And this is going to bring us to the election of 1800. Woo, election of 1800. So oftentimes, election of 1800 is called the Revolution of 1800. Ballots over bullets. And this is what I mean. So typically in Europe, when you see a shift in power, somebody's gonna die, right? It's gonna cause chaos, it's gonna cause bloodshed. But America, we still are living this experiment of democracy, right? Ancient Athens, they had democracy, but that was like a long time ago. And so we're going to try this democracy and see if it works. And so just to remind you, remember, George Washington didn't have a political party. He kind of leaned Federalist, but he didn't have a political party. He was kind of neutral. And then John Adams will be our only, so far, but he's our only Federalist president. And so what we're going to see is a major shift between the Federalists who are getting kicked out and then also the Democratic Republicans who are coming in. And so this is the first time we're really going to see a major shift of power, politically speaking, political party style. And so this is this going to work? Is this not going to work? Is democracy actually going to take hold or not? And as we'll see, there is no bloodshed over the election of 1800, apart from perhaps Alexander Hamilton. And so this is showing America is working. We're seeing a peaceful transition of power, and this is why it's called the Revolution of 1800. And this is such a big deal. This is actually what begins era 4 in AP US history, okay? Because it's a big deal. It's a big deal. Ballots over bullets. Bye, Federalists. Hello, Democratic Republicans. Okay, so the election of 1800, we see a lot of mudslinging. So mudslinging is exactly what this elephant is doing, slinging mud at the opponent. And we see this a lot today, but the idea is it's an attempt to ruin your opponent's reputation with the use of insults and accusations. So in this election, they're not really talking about the issues. They rather just kind of sling mud at one another's reputation. And so these are some examples of some mudslinging that's happening during this election. So Jefferson's people said of Adams, Adams is a hideous, hermaphroditical character, which has neither the force and firmness of a man, nor the gentleness and sensibility of a woman. That was nice, Jefferson. But Adams' people, they weren't nice to Jefferson either. And so according to Adams' people, Jefferson is a mean-spirited, low-lived fellow, the son of a half-breed Indian squaw, sired by a Virginia mulatto father. Ooh, I tell you what. And so it's going to be a lot of mudslinging back and forth. So it gets pretty nasty pretty quickly. All right. And so with this, the whole idea is that Jefferson and Adams had actually run for president earlier. So remember, after George Washington stepped down, Jefferson had run against Adams already in 1796, and Jefferson had lost. So this is going to be kind of a repeat of the 1796 election. All right, let's keep going. All right, and so what we're going to see is things turn out differently this time for Thomas Jefferson. So we're comparing kind of 1796 to the 1800 election. And so what's the difference here? So we know, of course, that Jefferson's going to win at this time, but why is he going to win this time? So if he lost last time, what's going to change? What's going to make the difference? And the difference for Jefferson really this time around, the swing state that he gets in his pocket in 1800, that Adams had in his pocket in 1796, is the state of New York. So which state was key to victory and who helped Jefferson get it? It is the state of New York. And now, as you can see, once again, 1796, we see that Adams, the Federalists, got New York. But in 1800, that went into the camp of the Democratic Republicans. And the person who really helped swing the state in favor of the Democratic Republicans was the one and only Aaron Burr. And so Aaron Burr, he is a politician from the state of New York. This is such a big deal for Thomas Jefferson that because of Aaron Burr's help in New York, Thomas Jefferson has him as a running mate. So Thomas Jefferson chooses Aaron Burr to be his vice presidential candidate. And so because of this support, Aaron Burr gets to be on the ticket with Hamilton as the VP. Okay, but things didn't go as planned. This is what happens. So remember this. If no one gets the we'll start first things first. So back in the day, this is different now, but back in the day, what would happen with the Electoral College is each elector of the Electoral College would get 2 votes, right? And so whoever got the most votes in the Electoral College would be president, and whoever got the second amount of votes would become vice president. Okay? Because remember, the Constitution has no really allowance for political parties. They didn't have political parties in mind when they're creating the Constitution. And so each elector gets 2 votes. Whoever gets the most votes would become president. Whoever gets the second most votes would become vice president. Okay? So the Democratic Republicans, they made a mistake. Someone was supposed to throw out a vote for Aaron Burr so that Jefferson would have gotten the most votes. But whoever that was didn't do their job, and so what happens is there's going to be a tie between Jefferson and Aaron Burr. And remember, to win to the Electoral College, you have to have the majority. Ties don't count, right? You need to get the majority. And so once again, this is just kind of one of those freak things that happen. This was never the plan. Jefferson was always supposed to be kind of the Democratic Republican nominee. And so somebody somewhere made a mistake, and so they tied on accident. All right, so that's how they tie, right? One Democratic Republican forgot to throw away their vote for Aaron Burr, and so although Aaron Burr was supposed to be vice president, it's tied. Oh no, oh no. Okay, so since no one gets the majority of electoral votes, who gets to decide who wins? That is, of course, the House of Representatives. House of Representatives gets to decide, right? This is in the Constitution. It was one of our key constitutional compromises. And so remember, in the House of Representatives, every state gets one vote. It doesn't matter if you're Virginia or North Carolina or Delaware or New Jersey. Every state gets one vote. And so what's going to happen is there is going to be lots of problems here. One thing to keep in mind, we'll just kind of go this here first. The 12th Amendment, just as an FYI, the 12th Amendment fixes this problem, so this will never happen again. So the 12th Amendment makes distinct ballots for president and vice president, so in the future, this problem won't happen again. So just FYI, the 12th Amendment is going to solve this issue. But at this point, the issue is not solved in the election of 1800. And so here's the idea, right? To win the presidency, you need to have a majority of votes in the House of Representatives, okay? And so what's happening is the House of Representatives is voting. Then they vote again, and they vote again, and they vote again, and really nothing's happening, right? No one's getting the majority of votes, right? And so after 35 different ballots trying to get someone to win, what finally happens is Jefferson wins. Now, what happened? What changed? What convinced people that Jefferson should be president over Aaron Burr? And it all comes down to Alexander Hamilton. So which person won on a letter-writing campaign against Aaron Burr? That is Alexander Hamilton. Now, I know you know that Alexander Hamilton, the founder of the Federalist, is not exactly a fan of Thomas Jefferson, the founder of the Democratic Republicans, but Hamilton, he's really choosing between two evils. He really hates both of them, but he really, personally abhors Aaron Burr. And so Alexander Hamilton uses as much influence as he can muster to convince people to swing the votes towards Thomas Jefferson. And so Jefferson, rightly so, becomes the president in 1800, and then Aaron Burr is the vice president. Could you imagine being Aaron Burr, right? Like you were just kind of fighting Thomas Jefferson to become president, and then all of a sudden now you're the vice president? That must have been a fun relationship. Anyway, and so like I said, this election is a hot mess, right? No one gets the majority, or rather, well, no one gets the majority because these guys tie. So it goes to the House. 35 ballots later, nobody gets the majority. And so Alexander Hamilton, letter-writing campaign, throws his support behind Jefferson, and Jefferson finally becomes president. Like I said, the election of 1800 is called the Revolution of 1800 because no one dies and we see a peaceful transition of power. But like I said, the exception to that rule is, of course, Alexander Hamilton. So Alexander Hamilton is going to die in part because of his involvement in the election of 1800. So let's just kind of talk about what's happening. Remember, Aaron Burr at this time is vice president. He got the second amount of votes, and so he is vice president under Thomas Jefferson. And so what happens is when Aaron Burr is vice president, he is running to become governor of New York, right? That's once he wants to be governor of New York after he's done being vice president. But Aaron Burr or I should say, but Alexander Hamilton, once again, hates Aaron Burr. And so these two men are both from the state of New York. And so what's going to happen is Alexander Hamilton is just going to go to town kind of bad-mouthing Aaron Burr, especially when it's coming to this race in New York. So he's going around New York and telling everybody that there's no way Aaron Burr would be a good governor. And so not only does Alexander Hamilton cost Aaron Burr the presidency, but now Alexander Hamilton cost Aaron Burr the governorship of New York. And as he's doing this, he's really, meaning Alexander Hamilton's really dragging Aaron Burr's name through the mud. And so Aaron Burr decides to challenge him to a duel. So Aaron Burr challenges Alexander Hamilton to the duel to kind of restore his reputation that Alexander Hamilton's kind of just drugged through the mud. All right, and so once again, what they do, they're from the state of New York, but they cross state lines. They go to New Jersey for the duel. And so what's going to happen is we're not super sure. So when it comes to a duel, every person involved in the duel has someone called the second, their second. And so there are two people who are witnessing this duel besides Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. And so each one has kind of a sidekick who witnesses the duel. And believe it or not, those two seconds, their accounts disagree of what happens. So we're not sure exactly what happens, but we know that Alexander Hamilton fires first. We don't know if he fired in the air on purpose, just to kind of signify that he's not actually going to get, he's not actually out for blood. We don't know if he just fires up in the air on purpose or if he fires and misses. But we know after Alexander Hamilton shoots and misses, then Aaron Burr can take all the time he wants to line up his shot, and boom! Alexander Hamilton falls to the ground. He has the gunshot goes through his abdomen and hits up against his spine. And Alexander Hamilton will actually officially die the next day. So now Aaron Burr is vice president, and as vice president, he's I believe he's like immune from actually being charged with murder because dueling was illegal. But really, his career is over with the death of Alexander Hamilton. And there you go. You can call me Aaron Burr by the way I'm dropping Hamiltons. And so you could say that Alexander Hamilton, in a sense, was the sole casualty of the Revolution of 1800. Okay, so kind of an interesting side note there. All right, so moving on, here we go. All right, so Jefferson has now won the presidency, and so as we know, when presidents are inaugurated, oftentimes their inaugural address is kind of like a thesis, kind of setting up what they believe, what they want to do and accomplish in their 4 years. And so this information down here is just kind of an FYI, and then we'll look at the actual text of his first inaugural address. So this is just an FYI. So in case you didn't notice, elections themselves are the Tuesday next after the first Monday in the month of November. So typically, like I said, it's the first Tuesday after the first Monday of November, okay? Originally, an inauguration wasn't until March 4th, and so you went from November all the way to March before the person became the president. Just because when we got our Constitution ratified, March 4th was the beginning of our government under the Constitution, and so they used that date as the day to inaugurate the president. But later on, we're going to see that that's not going to be the best idea because that creates a really long kind of lame duck period for the sitting president. And so just as an FYI, the 20th Amendment changed that. So since 1937, they switched inauguration to January 20th. So that's just neither here nor there, but just as an FYI, we're still under the situation where there's a pretty large lame duck presidency or period of the presidency. So I just wanted you to know that. Now you know that, Americans. All right, so let's look at the first inaugural address. And there's really kind of 3 points he's going to make in his first inaugural address, and we'll look at them individually. So the first thing kind of to note is he really wants to unify a politically divided nation. So once again, this is our first election where political parties are really involved. And once again, there's a lot of mudslinging. People are getting personal here. And so that's kind of the first major idea. He wants to unify a politically divided nation. So I'm just going to read a couple of little quotes here from his first inaugural address. All too will bear in mind the sacred principle that though the will of the majority is in all cases to prevail, that will to be rightful must be reasonable, that the minority possess their equal rights, which equal law must protect, and to violate would be oppression. Let us then, fellow citizens, unite with one heart and one mind. So he's saying, yes, it's good and it's right that the will of the majority prevails, but we can't just then spit on the minority, right? We need to know that they also have equal rights, equal dignity, and that we need to unify together. And then the second quote is probably the most famous out of all of his first inaugural address. Every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. We have called by different names brethren of the same principle. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists. And once again, remember the term Democratic Republican was oftentimes shortened to Republican. So he's saying, you know what, we have the same principle but different names. We're all Republicans. We're all Federalists. Okay, so that's the first kind of goal of his address. Next, he's going to, just like George Washington, suggest we stay out of European affairs, right? George Washington liked neutrality, and Thomas Jefferson thought that was a good idea as well. So, I quote him, "Let us then, with courage and confidence, pursue our own federal and republican principles, our attachment to union and representative government, kindly separated by nature and a wide ocean from the exterminating chaos or havoc of 1/4 of the globe, possessing a chosen country with room enough for our descendants to the 1,000th and 1,000th generations." So he's saying that it's very fortunate, it's a good thing that we are separated from the havoc of Europe by a wide ocean. So he's like, this is great. We're away from all that drama in Europe. Right. The essential principles of our government: equal and exact justice to all men, of whatever state of persuasion, religion, or politic, peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none. So yeah, unite politically, and then stay out of European affairs. And then last but not least, right, our Jeffersonian Republican, right, or Jeffersonian Republic idea right here, he favors a small government. The support of the state governments in all their rights as the most competent administration for our domestic concerns and the surest bulwark against anti-Republican tendencies. So Democratic Republican right here, power to the state, power to the state. And then once again, he doesn't really think that government should interfere too much in the day-to-day lives of citizens. A wise and frugal government, which shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. This is the sum of a good government. All right, so you can kind of just see what he's about, kind of the thesis of his presidency through this inaugural address. All right. All right, so let's look and see some stuff that goes down during his first term. And perhaps one of the most famous things that happens is the Louisiana Purchase. All right, let me get this together. All right, so let's talk about how it is we get Louisiana. Excuse me. All right, so as we know, Louisiana, it used to be controlled, get my notes here. It used to be controlled by Spain. Remember, we made Pinckney's Treaty with Spain. But now what we're going to see is Louisiana Purchase. This is now going to be with France. And so the question is, how did France get the territory from Spain? Okay. Well, here's the idea. Remember, it's the Napoleonic Wars. So Spain lost the Louisiana territory to the French in the Napoleonic Wars. And so this is just kind of to set the scene. FYI, we had just made Pinckney's Treaty with Spain and we liked it, but now that's all out the door because Spain lost Louisiana to the French in the Napoleonic Wars. All right, so originally, what did Jefferson try to buy from the French? So we weren't looking to get all of this territory. We only wanted one little thing, and that is New Orleans. So remember that under Pinckney's treaty, Spain gave us the right to deposit at New Orleans, which means we had the right to trade there, the right to use it. Well, now that that treaty's out the window, the French weren't letting us trade in New Orleans. And so really Thomas Jefferson's goal is to buy New Orleans because he knows how necessary it is for our economy. And so that is really what he's trying to buy from the French. He sends James Monroe to Paris to try to purchase it. And we might as well just say hello to James Monroe because he's going to be like around for a while. So James Monroe is the Secretary of State, the Foreign Affairs guy. So James Monroe, future President of the United States, goes to France, goes to Paris, and he's trying to negotiate just the purchase of New Orleans, but he gets more than he bargained for. Okay, so what are a couple of reasons why France wants to sell us everything? Well, look at that. Here's a couple of reasons. So why is France so willing to sell us everything, not even just New Orleans? Well, number one, France had a sugar island called Haiti. But there was a slave uprising in Haiti, and so France lost control of Haiti, and so really they don't need to supply the island anymore, and so this territory in the New World really isn't that beneficial because they don't have to worry about feeding the slaves in Haiti because the slaves in Haiti are now in control of themselves. And two, once again, this is in the heart of the Napoleonic Wars. The French are being attacked by pretty much all the monarchs in Europe at the same time. And the French are realizing, you know what, they're probably going to lose this territory to Britain in the Napoleonic Wars. So they thought, you know what, before Britain wins it anyway, why don't we sell it, make some money, and go on with life, right? And so these are two reasons why, you know, France wasn't really interested in forming a greater North American empire. Napoleon was too worried about trying to take over Europe to really worry about Louisiana. Okay. So we bought it, right? Louisiana Purchase, we didn't win it, we bought it. So how much did it cost? So it was $15 million, which was a steal. That equates to about 3 cents an acre. And so we were only looking for New Orleans, but we couldn't say no to a deal this great. And remember, this is Jefferson. Jefferson loves this because Jefferson wants as much land as possible because in his head, that's how America should be, right? Every family has a farm. They're independent. The government doesn't mess with them. And so he's going to love the Louisiana Purchase because this fits right in with his Jeffersonian Republic ideal. However, we do know that Jefferson is hesitant about buying the Louisiana Purchase. And you would think it's a no-brainer. It's 3 cents an acre. Seriously, why would you not? And this is the problem, right? He is a Democratic Republican. And Democratic Republicans have a really strict interpretation of the Constitution. And he's thumbing through his Constitution, at least he is in my imagination, and he sees nothing in the Constitution that gives the president the power or the authority to buy land. And he's like, oh my gosh. All right, one, I super want to buy this. This is clearly a good deal. But two, like, I'm a Democratic Republican, and it doesn't say in the Constitution that the president has the power to buy land, and so he's kind of stuck. And so what he does is he kind of squints his eyes a little bit, and he reads in the Constitution, Article 2, Section 2, quote, "The president shall have power by and with the advice and consent of Senate to make treaties provided 2/3 of the presence or the senators present concur." And so he's looking at Article 2, Section 2, squinting his eyes, and he's saying, you know what, this is like a treaty. You know, it's not me just buying land. We're making a treaty. And so he kind of, a little bit squints his eyes here and decides that this is good enough because obviously this is the right thing for America. And he says, this is the justification I need. We'll buy it. We'll move on with life. And that's exactly what happens. He buys it and we move on with life. Now, we don't often get a little shout out to Iowa, but look, Iowa is a part of the Louisiana Purchase. Isn't that exciting? So exciting, Iowa. You exist in history of the United States. Okay. So now that we have this huge territory, we're now going to look at the core of discovery, Lewis and Clark. Okay. So here we go. So here's some kind of basic stuff to know about the core of discovery. The core of discovery. We go here. So let's talk about Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. So Lewis is perhaps the better known of the two because Lewis was Jefferson's private secretary. So for example, just a little background on Meriwether Lewis. He was in the militia. He had been part of the group that quelled the Whiskey Rebellion, for example, and then became the private secretary to Thomas Jefferson. And so he and his friend William Clark lead this expedition. It lasts about 2 years, roughly speaking. They travel 8,000 miles. In all, there's about 45 people in the expedition, some more, some less. Okay, so 45 at the max. And so they're traveling kind of through the Louisiana Purchase, kind of looking at and mapping this new territory that we just bought. And so once again, what are they doing? They're making detailed maps about where they travel, and they're actually collecting species and samples of different plants and animals. So they gathered about 300 different samples of different plants and animals as they go along. Of course, another thing that happens, I'll go back to this one, is they encounter a lot of different Native Americans along the way as well. And so they're kind of informing the Native Americans that this land is now owned by the United States of America. But for the most part, they really didn't encounter too much hostility as they were traveling through meeting the Native Americans. Very famously, of course, one of the famous members of the Corps of Discovery was Sacagawea. So you might know Sacagawea. She's like the face that's on our dollar coin, gold coin. I don't know how you say this, but on our dollar coin. That's how I'm going to say it. And so just a little background on her because she is super famous and super interesting. So she's going to act as the interpreter and ambassador for the group when it comes to a lot of different Native Americans. Obviously, she doesn't know all of the different tribes' languages, but for the most part, that's kind of her role. And so this is kind of like some backstory on Sacagawea here. So she was 16 and pregnant at the beginning of this expedition. They actually hire her husband, who was a French fur trapper, and so she comes along kind of with her husband as well. Kind of as a side note here, she does give birth during the journey, and so here's the little guy, John Baptiste, I think is his name. Little guy is right there. So anyway, so she's the interpreter ambassador during this. Like I said, side note here, her husband had actually purchased her. So when she was a little girl, she had been kidnapped and taken captive by another tribe, and then that tribe just sold her off. And so this French guy actually bought her as a wife. And many historians believe that he actually had another Indian wife that he purchased as well. So, like I said, a little historical drama there. But Sacagawea, you should just know she's acting as a translator and interpreter for the group as they go along. Yeah. And so, once again, you can kind of see the map of where they went. Where's my map? But they're going to go all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and then once they get to the Pacific, that's far enough, and then they'll retrace their steps going back to St. Louis. Okay, here we go. All right. So, we're going to talk about pirates, and it's a real part of the United States history. And so we're going to talk about the Barbary pirates. So first things first, let's talk about where the Barbary coast is. So we're talking about the Mediterranean, so kind of the north coast of Africa and the Mediterranean. This is the Barbary coast. And so here's the idea. There's pirates that live in the Barbary coast, and what they'll do is they'll charge protection money to different countries of different merchant ships. So it's kind of like the mob in a sense. So like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the mob, but this is kind of how the mob used to function, that they would go up to, you know, a local store and they'd say, hey, I really hope nothing bad would ever happen to you or your store. you know what, you should pay me $1,000 a month and I'll protect you to make sure nothing bad would ever happen to your store. And so once again, it's an implied threat. Like, if you don't give me $1,000 a month, something bad's going to happen to your store. But if you pay them $1,000 a month of protection fees, you know, nothing bad would happen. And so that's kind of what's happening with these pirates. And what's happening is a lot of the European countries are in the midst of the Napoleonic Wars, and they don't want to have to deal with the pirates. And so most of the European countries just pay this bribe to the pirates just to make sure that they don't have to mess with pirates and their merchant ships would be fine. Well, as you might note, the United States used to be a part of Great Britain, and so Great Britain would pay this bribe, or this whatever you call it, the bribe to these pirates, but now the United States were independent, right? We ain't part of Great Britain no more. And Thomas Jefferson's very much, if anything, is a man of ideals. And he's saying the United States of America is not going to pay a bribe to a bunch of pirates. So despite the fact that he wants to stay out of foreign affairs, he is willing to go to war with some pirates over the principle of not paying for bribes. And so what happens is called the Tripolitan American War. Because think of like Tripolitan American War. And this lasts from 1801 to 1805. And we are literally sending warships over to the Mediterranean to protect our merchant ships from pirates. And so it's really kind of one of those random parts of American history where little known war with the pirates in Tripoli. But nonetheless, how does it end? It ends with U.S. agreeing, we kind of settle it. So this is the kind of the terms of how we settle it. So the U.S. agrees to pay a cash bounty of $60,000. So we give $60,000 to these pirates, and they're going to free then all of our prisoners that they had captured during the war, and then they promised to stop attacking us. And so after this deal was brokered, our ships go back home. So it is kind of one of these very random points of American history. The official kind of theme song of the Marines talks about this. Maybe one day you can Google that. But really, it's kind of one of those side notes things, but it's happening during his first term, so we're going to talk about it. So this is just a free fact or a free suggestion for you. So if you're ever looking for like maybe a good Halloween costume, what you should do is you should dress up with a friend. So somebody should dress up as a Barbary pirate with like, a sword and stuff like pirates have. And then someone should dress up like Thomas Jefferson, and he would have like a copy of the Declaration of Independence. And then like you could fight with the Declaration of Independence and a sword. So if you're ever looking for a good kind of couples costume or a costume with a friend, whatever, I'm just saying the Barbary Pirates, Thomas Jefferson, it's a real thing. The Tripolitan American War, it happened. There you go. All right, enough is enough with that. Now we're going to go to his second term. And his second term, like I said, we're going to look at some domestic stuff, and then where a lot of it's going to be foreign policy stuff as well, because it's going to be leading us into the War of 1812 here real soon. All right. So we have to say hello to Chief Justice John Marshall. So we're going to look at the domestic stuff, or stuff that's happening in the United States in general during Thomas Jefferson's second term. So Chief Justice John Marshall. So in case you didn't know by the title Chief Justice, he's a part of the Supreme Court. And John Marshall is called the ghost of Hamilton, right? Hamilton's dead. He got shot in the gut by Aaron Burr. But remember, Hamilton was Mr. Federalism. He wanted a strong federal government. And so Chief Justice John Marshall is kind of considered the ghost of Hamilton because the spirit of Hamilton lives on in John Marshall. So John Marshall is going to be like a Federalist, true and true. His whole time as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is going to be decision after decision, which will give more authority or more power to the federal government. All right, so the ghost of Hamilton, Chief Justice John Marshall, will be looking at a number of decisions he makes because they do set a lot of precedents in the country as well. All right, so let's talk about Marbury versus Madison. So this is perhaps one of the most important / famous Supreme Court cases ever. And so you're definitely going to have to know this for like government next year. So why not just kind of learn it now? All right, so let's set the stage for Marbury versus Madison. So here's the backdrop. Here's the context. So we're talking about the election of 1800, right? That really kind of dramatic election where the Federalists lose power and Thomas Jefferson, the Democratic Republicans move in. Well, the writing is on the wall. So in November 1800 of the election of 1800, we know that the Federalists are losing the presidency and the Federalists are losing control of Congress. And so the only branch of government kind of left in the hands of the Federalists is the judicial branch, right? So the Federalists know they don't have the president, Thomas Jefferson won. They don't have Congress, right? The Democratic Republicans took over. And so really the only branch left to them is the judicial branch. And so what they do is Federalists, they start to appoint more and more judges. So they're creating new judgeships just so they can fill them with kind of Federalist judges, right? And so they're saying, okay, you're a judge, you're a judge, you're a judge. And they're appointing all of these judges. They're making them all Federalists because at least they can control one of the branches of Congress or one of the branches of government. That's what they want to do. And some of these judges are appointed even up to the night before Jefferson takes office. And so these judges that were appointed even the night before Jefferson takes office, they're nicknamed midnight judges, right? And so this is what brings us to Marbury versus Madison. All right, so the Marbury in Marbury versus Madison is William Marbury, and he's one of these midnight judges. He was assigned to become the Justice of Peace in D.C. All right, well, the Secretary of State, James Madison, refuses to deliver the commission. And the whole idea here is they had the commission created, but they didn't actually deliver it. So James Madison doesn't want this Federalist guy being the Justice of Peace in D.C. So as Secretary of State, he's like, well, they weren't delivered, so we're just gonna put those on a shelf and forget that ever happened. William Marbury's like, wait a minute, you can't do that. Like, I was appointed. You have to, like, send the commission. That's no fair, right? And so it goes to the Supreme Court to decide what's fair, what's not. And so what Chief Justice John Marshall does is he doesn't decide one way or the other. What he does instead is just dismisses the case. What? He's dismissing the case. Why would you dismiss the case, Chief Justice John Marshall? This is why. He said the Judiciary Act of 1789, which is the act that enabled Marbury to bring this case to the Supreme Court in the first place, was unconstitutional. So he's throwing out the case because he's saying this is unconstitutional, right? Which is a big idea. So this is what I mean by that. So judicial review, if you can connect the term judicial review with Marbury versus Madison, you're going to do well. So judicial review is something we take for granted today. It's really not a contested thing at all. So judicial review is the idea of the power of the Supreme Court to review actions taken by Congress or the President and decide whether or not those actions are legal under the Constitution. So in our head, this is pretty much what the Supreme Court's supposed to do, but really, this is a precedent that was started by Chief Justice John Marshall. So the idea of judicial review, the idea that the judges, the Supreme Court, can review decisions of the president and vice president and declare them to be illegal or unconstitutional, that is a pretty big power grab. But keep in mind, John Marshall, he likes a strong federal government, so he is 100% okay with the Supreme Court getting that power, right? Because he's okay with that. He's a Federalist. And so once again, it's not so much does William Marbury win or lose, but really the idea is the case is just dismissed because once again, the act that enabled Marbury to bring the case to the Supreme Court in the first place, he said that was unconstitutional. And because that was unconstitutional, Marbury didn't even have the right to bring this decision or this case to the Supreme Court. Judicial review. I tell you what. And so some big ideas with John Marshall as well. Right, Chief Justice John Marshall will continue to use his position in the Supreme Court to support Federalist ideas until his death. So when the Federalist Party is dead, the only way the Federalist Party is going to be after the Federalist Party dies kind of on a national level, there's no more Federalist presidents. We're going to see fewer and fewer Federalist congressmen. Even after that happens, Chief Justice John Marshall is going to be kind of a bulwark of the Federalist Party, meaning that he's going to continue to support decisions that strengthen the national government. Let's see. Marshall maintained that Supreme Court's responsibility to overturn unconstitutional legislation was a necessary consequence of their sworn oaths to uphold the Constitution. So once again, he's totally okay with judicial review. He's saying it's just the part of the job. We swear to uphold the Constitution, and this is how we do that, practically speaking. Dang! All right. And so, like I said, this is Hamilton's ghost. Chief Justice John Marshall, we'll talk about him later on as well. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the foreign policy stuff, and this is going to bring us to the brink of war, the War of 1812. So the War of 1812 is one of those wars where not a lot of people understand what it's about. So just big idea. We fought the American Revolutionary War against Great Britain, right? About 30 years later, 29 years later, we're going to fight Great Britain again in the War of 1812. So some historians will consider the War of 1812 to be kind of part 2 of the American Revolution, because once again, it's the United States fighting against Great Britain. So it's about 30 years-ish in between the two wars. And so we're going to look at a lot of stuff going down that's going to create some bad blood between the United States and Great Britain. And we're not going to go to war during Thomas Jefferson's presidency, but a lot of the road to war, a lot of the bad blood's going to start developing during his presidency. So foreign policy drama, here we go. So let's just remember one thing quick. Once again, Napoleon is at war with pretty much everyone in England, or everyone in Europe. And so France and Great Britain are fighting in the Napoleonic Wars. Backdrop idea, okay? And so really Great Britain is getting the upper hand when it comes to the sea, because Great Britain has an amazing navy, but the French are really kind of dominating when it comes to land. So it's pretty evenly set here, in a sense, okay? I'm sure historians will disagree with that, but in a sense, they're both fighting here. And so, you know what? The United States, we want to be neutral, right? We had George Washington's neutrality proclamation. We're holding to it. We don't want to get involved in this war. But it's going to be really hard for us to do that because France made the Berlin-Milan Decree. And in that, France is going to prevent the U.S. from trading with Great Britain. Okay. And so Britain turns around and says, two can play that game. And so Britain responds with the Orders in Council, which is Great Britain preventing the U.S. from trading with France. And the United States are like, just respect our neutrality. We just want to trade with everyone. But it's not possible because these two countries are preventing us from trading with the other one. So France isn't letting us trade with Great Britain, and Great Britain is preventing us from trading with France. And we're like, so over it. We're neutral here. Leave us alone. They ain't respecting our neutrality at all. Okay, so moving on here. All right, and then here's some other bad blood stuff that's brewing. So we've talked about impressments briefly before, but remember impressment is when typically Great Britain or France, both sides there was impressment there, but they would take a hold of one of our merchant ships, they would steal all the stuff, and then they would force the sailors to go into their navy, so to impress them in their navy. Typically the reasoning behind that is they'd say, oh, these people were deserters, that these people were rightly in the British Navy and had become deserters and were only taking them back because they're originally a part of the Navy. So that was at least the excuse they used as to why an impressment was happening. Anyway, so this is a really famous example of impressment, and impressment overall is one of the huge issues that are going to lead us to the War of 1812. Okay. So the Chesapeake Leopard Affair. So the USA, our ship is called the Chesapeake, which makes sense because it's in the Chesapeake Bay. And so this is a US ship. The Great Britain ship is the Leopard. And what's going to happen is impressment. So once again, this is right off the shore of the United States, which makes it even worse, meaning it brings it home more. because it was literally in our backyard. And so once again, the Leopard is trying to impress the sailors on the Chesapeake, but the Chesapeake refuses. And so what happens is the Leopard starts opening fire on the Chesapeake, and that's going to lead to 3 Americans killed and 18 injured. And then add insult to injury, not only are some American sailors killed and injured, but 4 of our men are impressed into the British Navy. And so this is impressment kind of brought home, kind of a big deal. So Jefferson, in response to this, expels all British warships from U.S. waters and denounces impressment. But really, it's kind of rallying Americans against Great Britain. I can't believe they're doing this. You know, it's right off the coast of the Chesapeake. Crazy. All right. So let's go to the Embargo Act. So much fun with the causes of the War of 1812. So the Embargo Act, this is what's happening. So as we know, we can't trade with Great Britain because of France, and we can't trade with France because of Great Britain. And so we are fed up with it. And so Jefferson says, you know what? Fine. We won't trade with anyone, period. We won't trade with Great Britain. We won't trade with France. We won't trade with Spain. We won't trade with the Dutch. We won't trade with nobody. We're closed for business. Embargo, period, end of story. No trading with anyone. And so what does that look like? So no U.S. ship can leave an American port to go to a foreign port. Okay, so not American ship can't leave the U.S. to go to a foreign port. No foreign vessel can load a cargo at an American port. So no, like France can't show up and start trading at our port. That wasn't allowed. And even if you wanted to travel on the coast, you had to kind of like pay a ransom for your cargo. So coastwise shipping must post a bond twice the value of the ship and cargo. And once it was delivered safely to another port in the United States, the bond would be repaid. And so once again, they're serious. They don't want any trading with foreign countries. No trading with no one. So once again, 1807 isn't necessarily a part of the name of the act, but it's just kind of giving you a sense of time because the War of 1812 is going to be coming up here soon. Okay, 1812, now it's 1807. So let's look at a little chart here. All right, so 1807, the embargo is starting. Oh my gosh. Value of exports, value of imports, that's going down because we're not supposed to trade with no one. All right, so let's think of this. The Embargo Act. We're not trading anymore. Who's this going to hurt the most? Well, as you might suspect, who's going to hate the Embargo Act? It's going to be the East Coast, right? And who's on the East Coast? Well, the Federalists are. So once again, this is just an electoral map of 1800, just so you can kind of see where the Federalists lived. So once again, the Federalists are in this kind of coral color here. And so the Federalists are the ones that trade with Great Britain, that make money through trade. And so they're absolutely going to hate this Embargo Act. Not only can they not trade, but they see it as coming from a Democratic Republican president, from Thomas Jefferson. And so this is super, 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 super unpopular. And with this, New England just refuses to enforce it. They're saying no, and there wasn't enough federal agents to enforce it, right? The states needed to, but the New England states just absolutely refused. And so we're going to just see is people ignoring this and a whole lot of smuggling going on. Even the state of Connecticut, little Connecticut there, Connecticut is going to call this act unconstitutional, right? So remember when the Democratic Republicans, for example, really hated the Alien and Sedition Acts, the state of Virginia and Kentucky had declared that to be unconstitutional within their state. And so Connecticut's kind of pulling one of those as well. And so you can see it's absolutely a failure. It's a flop. It's not enforced. People are up in arms about this Embargo Act. All right. So in the midst of this crisis here, Thomas Jefferson is going to step down because this is going to be at the end of his second term. And so taking a nod from Washington, he decides not to run again. But a couple of days before he left office, a new act was passed. And this is called the Non-Intercourse Act. And so what the Non-Intercourse Act does is it reopens trades with everyone except for Britain and France. So the Non-Intercourse Act opens trade for everyone except for Britain and France. You can trade with the Dutch and the Spanish and whoever else you want, as long as it's not Britain or France. And so we're kind of taking a step back from the super harsh Embargo Act. Okay. All right, so to be continued here a little bit. So let's go here. So once again, we had the Berlin-Milan Decree, and that was, let me get my notes here, that was stopping the U.S. from trading with Britain. We had the Orders in Council, which is stopping the U.S. from trading with France. The Embargo Act says we're not trading with anybody. The Non-Intercourse Act is saying, all right, we'll trade with people except for Britain and France. All right, so just one last thing. We want to show you how much the Embargo Act was hated. So here's some political cartoons just hating on the Embargo Act. All right, so here we go. Oh my gosh, it says, darn, how it nicks 'em. Oh, this cursed ogramimi. That's how I pronounce that. All right, so super fine. I'm guessing this is sugar. And he's trying to trade it, but he's being bit in the butt by what? Well, guess what this word is? It's embargo spelled backwards. And so this guy's getting bit in the butt by the embargo. Here's another one. This is just kind of fun. I'm just going to read the bottom here. Once again, this guy's chopping off the head of the embargo. He doesn't like the embargo. Must be a Federalist. So on the 1-year anniversary of the Embargo Act, sailors and shipbuilders in port towns of the Northeast protested the act by marching to funeral music. Ships in the harbors flew their flags at half-mast to protest the act. And so once again, like they know how to be dramatic. So a year after the act passed, they have like a funeral march because that's how much they hate the Embargo Act. So once again, this is the road to the War of 1812. Thomas Jefferson pieces out because his 2 terms is up. But we're going to see we're not even started with the drama leading us to the War of 1812.